I'm Giles McMullen and I'm chatting to Ulrika Hasselgren. Ulrika, you're the co-founder and president of Ethics SRI Advisors. Tell us a little bit about the company for those that don't know much about you.
Okay, well, it started in late '99, and when we established the business, and it was actually a result of an assignment that we had for the National Blind Association in Sweden, who wanted us to help them to develop a policy for responsible investment. And so that project then turned into a company. And in early 2000 we had the assignment for the National Pension Fund AP7 to help them create a policy that incorporated ethical, environmental issues into the investment process. So that's how it all started. And back then these issues of environmental, social, ethical questions were quite new to some extent in the Nordic region, but since has grown quite dramatically, I would say.
So how did you develop your screening process to go from where you were back in 1999, 2000 that you mentioned there to where you are now? How's your process evolved?
The process has evolved on the one hand based on clients becoming more aware and more also knowledgeable about these issues regarding environmental standards, international norms for let's say human rights, labor standards, corruption issues, etc. So it's on the one hand the development is driven by client demand and the way clients use these factors into the investment process. And also it's driven by a sort of increasing global awareness about, on the one hand, global challenges for our planet and how that come into effect into an investor's agenda and investment process. So
talk us through the process. On what basis would you screen out a company or allow a company to be invested in on an ethical basis? The standard that we are working with as a platform is called norm-based screening, and that has become a standard that a number of large investors in the Nordic region as well as Europe are using to identify companies involved in breaches of international norms for human rights, labor standards, environmental norms, etc. And with this process, we rely initially on third-party data. That means that we actively seek information from a large number of sources. May there be organizations within the UN system, authorities, media, different stakeholder groups, non-governmental organizations. So we collect a lot of data about allegations of corporate involvement in different types of breaches. Now, based on this large amount of data, we then go into a second phase, which is the validation and verification of these allegations. And in that state, we come into also a dialogue with the company and stakeholders around a specific problem identified. And that dialogue with the company serves to give us more facts about a specific situation, and it also gives us information about the company's view on a particular issue of concern and how the company may take action in a positive direction. So you actually speak to the company involved to find out what they're up to? Absolutely,
yes. It is an essential part of our research process and our assessment of corporate social responsibility. Because of course, on the one hand, we have all this information and they may come from non-governmental organizations or even media stating certain things about a company. But in order for us to make a complete analysis, we also need the company's view on those allegations.
That describes norm-based screening. Now, let's talk about sector-based screening. How do you approach that?
Well, the sector-based screening is a methodology to also identify and assess companies involved in what we would call controversial activities. That may range from alcohol, tobacco,
weapons, arms industry, gambling, pornography, and going all the way to GMO, fossil fuels, nuclear energy, etc., etc. And this is very much client driven, because some investors have certain values which they want to see implemented in the investment process. And there we basically look at two areas. The one is to define the level of involvement and the threshold that some investors may want to take, or the responsible analysis of a company in these certain areas. I mean, for example, looking at a arms company or weapons company, we may look at not only the types of weapons that they produce, but also where they sell these, to what countries, if they sell these weapons to repressive regimes or countries in conflict. Or for that matter, an alcohol company, a brewery, may have a policy for responsible drinking and collaborating with local authorities and industry groups to take their responsibility, even though the product itself may be controversial for some investors.
That's your approach. How would a company use your services?
Depends on their policy and maybe their values. If I may take a few examples, a church organization may have very strict guidelines with regards to alcohol and tobacco, for example, and they may have a zero tolerance. That means that we would identify the whole sector of companies and relate that to their portfolio or the investment universe, and flag for those companies that they should be considered for divestment. Whereas another investor may have a different threshold. They may say, we think it is relevant to look at companies with, for example, more than 5% of their revenues from a particular area or sector, and then draw the line there.
And as far as the companies that use you are concerned, I mean, how much money do they have under management, the firms that you would use your service?
We've tried to calculate it, and it's not completely easy, but we estimate it to be around 250 billion euros, all in all.
It's a large amount of money.
That is a large amount of money, yes.
If we talk about your screening process, what's the universe of companies that you cover?
The universe is truly global in the sense that we are, for example, covering all companies within the MSCI World Index and also the MSCI Emerging Markets Index. The research process is such that we're looking for incidents all around the world, and we're relying on an initial third-party data. So by that we can also incorporate new companies into our screening universe as they come along, or as Spar Invest needs to look at more companies that may be outside the current universe. But we cover some 6,000 companies in our database currently.
And you have analysts that then, once you've received that third-party data, that then can look a little bit more closely?
Yes, we have an international team of analysts, and for us it's very valuable with these highly competent analysts that also speak several languages. And we have analysts that speak Mandarin, Japanese, Hindi, and we cover also Russian as well as the traditional English, French, German, Spanish. So that's very good.
Now, turning to your relationship with Spar Invest, how does that work? What's the brief? Because they've got their ethical global value fund, but Spar Invest also has other funds as well. So, what's your participation with the whole universe of the Spar Invest investments?
Well, we've had the opportunity to work with Spar Invest for a number of years and provided them with information that is used in their investment process and with their different funds. For the Ethical Global Value Fund specifically, we provide them with information early on in the investment process so that they can incorporate that into the actual portfolio, and that includes information about companies that are involved in unaddressed violations of international norms for human rights, environmental standards, labor standards, and corruption. As well, we identify companies that are involved in these controversial business activities such as alcohol, tobacco, arms, gambling, and pornography.
So that's the Ethical Global Value Fund. So presumably if any of the companies that on a value basis had been selected as for possible inclusion into the fund, if you saw those on a list, your screening process would screen those out. But you say your relationship goes back longer than that. So what do you do for the other investments?
Well, we provide them similar research coverage, but we also help Sparinvest with company dialogue, and that can also be part of this new fund, where we may identify a company of concern, but rather than taking any action of screening it out, we want to enter into a dialogue with the company to promote change, where Sparinvest, being an investor, can have that possibility to actually participate in the positive change for the company.
And companies, I mean, you mentioned dialogue with companies as part of your process before, but if you approach a company and say, you know, we've got a large investor, Sparinvest, they're interested in investing, but unfortunately our screening process has flagged you up as not an ethical investment, is that company willing to talk to you?
Absolutely, and this is a positive development through the years, because these issues are today not news to the companies. I mean, most companies today, being multinationals, are aware of the risks and the possibilities with the human rights issues, labor standards, environmental concerns, and because they come from the investors today very clearly and very focused, companies are willing to engage in dialogue with investors.
So the result of Sparinvest having an ethical fund and using yourselves can really be a change for good?
I believe so very much, yes.
Ulrika Hasselgren, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.